Hello! So I really wanted to kind of introduce myself and my channel. I would like to make more videos, kind of like a mix of like art and talking about media and just the kind of stuff I really like and I'm really into, especially where my focus is on like the anime convention circuit and visual novels and books and things of that nature. And what I really wanted to do for the end of this year is talk about the books that I read in 2024. I have not read this much since I was maybe 11. I, in the past year and a half, recently finished Umineko, the visual novel, and it ended up being one of my favorite pieces of media of all time. That and Higurashi I read through the entire pandemic, and they were like literally exactly what I needed. But after I finished reading Umineko, I was kind of at a loss. Like, what am I gonna... Obviously, I can't just jump into a different VN immediately. Like, I just read something life-changing. So I went to the Umineko Reddit page and asked some fans, like, hey, what are some recommendations you guys can give me for books like Umineko? And I got a ton of responses, and I ended up immediately going to the Barnes & Noble near me and buying like 4 books. I zoomed through them and realized, oh my god, A, I love reading. I should have known that from the start, but I hadn't been looking at the types of books for me in a while. I haven't been really exploring what is out there in literature for horror and mystery and metafiction and drama and all the things that I really, really love about Umineko. So that is kind of the crux of this video. It is not just necessarily for Umineko fans. I would recommend any of these books to any like visual novel fan. And even then, not all of the books that I read this year I got from that Reddit. A few of them I already had on my shelf and wanted to try out, and a few of them were just kind of like random recommendations I saw but ended up really, really loving. So this video goes through every book that I read this year, regardless of whether or not I think it's exactly like Umineko or not. You might notice in the rest of this video that the stack's turned backwards. That's because I recorded this later, but that's okay. So here is my list of recommendations and kind of what I have to think about them. I, for the most part, really try not to be spoilery. I'm just trying to give you my impression of the book and kind of what the general plot is, or at least like the inciting incident. I'll put like an actual trigger warning in the description because I forgot to do that for the majority of the books. But there's a few books in this stack that I think necessitate just kind of knowing what you're getting into, knowing like the level of gruesome that it is and the type of gruesome that it is. But most of these are pretty okay, safe reads. But on to the Rex. So the first book I read this year is 13 Stories. This is a horror book kind of through and through. There is an element of mystery to most of Jonathan Sims' writing, but if you, like me, are a fan of Magnus Archives, the format will be pretty familiar to you. He goes through multiple characters who are all individually invited to dinner by the owner of the building. And it goes through, the building has both a poorer side and a richer side, and each one of these characters are from various different floors and parts of the building, various different classes, but each one of them experiences some type of like unimaginable horror that very in the tune of Magnus Archives consumes their life until they are given an invitation for a dinner with this wealthy building owner. That's kind of the pitch for the book. I really, really enjoyed this one. It's not my favorite that I read this year, but I like it pretty much just as much as I like Magnus Archives. It doesn't have like the same overarching plot kind of depth as Magnus Archives has. Each story is really, it's basically a anthology of short stories with a plot to kind of string them all together. If you're looking for a pretty light horror, something that's not super intense, super gory, just kind of unsettling, scary, I would definitely recommend 13 Stories as a really good one to go for that. With that in mind, I'm gonna go on to my next one, which is the Tokyo Zodiac Murders. This is the first book that I got recommended on that Umineko Reddit page. It is a really cool, gruesome Japanese murder mystery. I read a ton of murder mysteries this year. I would say half of this list are murder mysteries. But I also really love murder mysteries that really incorporate the horror element of the death really well, or do something cultish or something like really gruesome and intriguing, and that is exactly this book. The case in Tokyo Zodiac follows an artist who lives with a giant group of women, and he writes a detailed plan on how he wants to do a kind of like giant cult sacrificey like murder ritual to turn all of them individually, like use their pieces to create his ideal woman. And each of the girls have different zodiac signs, and he finds different places in rural Japan to bury different parts of the girls. And we follow a pair of detectives who go out and try to figure out what happened. I would not say that the detectives in the story are very compelling. I definitely have a higher pick for that on my list, but I think that the actual murder mystery in this one is the most compelling that I read. It's just very creepy, and it's kind of exactly the type of thing I'm looking for when I am looking for murder and death and gore and all that kind of stuff. So I give a giant thumbs up to Tokyo Zodiac Murders. The next book on my list is actually one I would say I don't particularly recommend. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Half the reason I've kept this book is because I love the spine. It's very shiny and it looks great on my bookshelf. I'm being a little too harsh. I actually find the scenario of this book very interesting. I really like the concept of it. It is about a man who wakes up with no memory. He's a butler at it's very classic murder mystery type party. At the end of the day, he witnesses the murder of the titular character, Evelyn Hardcastle, and then wakes up again, but in a different member of the party's body. So this is a murder mystery time loop, which again sounds like it is exactly my thing, and I 100% understand why I was recommended this book. But I found that I did not like any of the main characters. There is a chapter in this book that is like really heavy-handed with like fat phobia, which is really disappointing because that was the most interesting chapter in the book I found. Again, I really am not trying to give intense spoilers for you guys. The system of how the time loops work in this book, I kind of hate. As a visual novel fan, I have seen many a time loop in my day. Let me just say that. You spend so long of this book trying to figure out the mystery of like, why are we stuck in a time loop? Why are we waking up in different bodies? Why do we have to solve this murder? And the answer to that is just, it's just really heavy-handed, and I didn't buy into it, and I don't know. That's actually pretty much it about Evelyn Hardcastle. Let's move on to ones I liked a little better. I can't go on a murder mystery binge without reading any Christie. I've actually never read any Agatha Christie before. I really don't know what I can say about And Then There Were None that hasn't already been said. This was a really fantastic murder mystery. I did not guess really anything going in. I kind of like treating murder mysteries as a challenge and really trying to get into who the culprit is. I'll take notes. I really did that with Tokyo Zodiac. I took notes. Which, again, kind of from Umineko, I have found a lot of fun and peace with sitting on the mystery before the reveal and trying to sit and puzzle out what I can myself before actually getting to the culprit and so. And Then There Were None is a book about 10 strangers who find themselves invited to an island by a mysterious UN Owen. Like the title suggests, they are all picked off one by one. What do I have to say about And Then There Were None? What do I have to say? It's Agatha Christie. If you've read a murder mystery, you have read And Then There Were None. If you have watched Knives Out, if you have watched any murder mystery movie, read a VN, someone read And Then There Were None and was like, hey, let me write a book. Let me write a movie. You've read this. You don't know it, but you read this. That's what I have to say about And Then There Were None. I liked it. Next. The next book on my list doesn't really have anything to do with mystery, but it is sincerely one of the best horror books and one of the best books I have ever read. So, we got Manhunt. Manhunt was not one of the books recommended to me. I actually picked this up at Blue Stockings Cooperative in New York. Also, that bookstore is a really, really cool queer bookstore in New York City that focuses on, like, diversity and marginalization. And you should buy books from them because they're having some trouble right now, so go buy books from Blue Stockings. I'll put a little link in the description of their page because I don't think they ship, but if you're in New York or New Jersey in the New York area, go give them some love. And remember to wear a mask. But anyway, Manhunt. I did not really know much about Manhunt before going in. I knew it was a trans femme, like, revenge story. I had no idea what I was getting into when I was met with a world of just, like, post-apocalyptic, all cisgender men have transformed into beasts because of their testosterone level that attack you like rabid zombie dogs. And in order to stay alive as a trans woman, you have to extract estrogen from their nuts and consume it. So the book follows two trans women who have been best friends since high school as they go out and hunt men so that they themselves do not transform. Holy shit. I couldn't put in words what this book means to me. It is, the characters in Manhunt are all so fantastic. It really, like, punches you in the face and really gets really into the semantics of the world, and, like, it's kind of goofy, but at the same time, like, fucking punk rock as hell. The bad guys in the book are a group of, like, roaming motorcycle turfs, and they're trying to bring this, like, women's rights movement throughout all of the areas that still exist to try to weed out any trans women there who are trying to survive. And this book just really deals with some interesting parts of the trans experience. Like, the horror in the book doesn't just come from, like, the monsters in it. There's a lot of really gruesome and graphic scenes and, like, depictions of violence against trans women, but it's so real and it's so honest. Like, I feel like I know the women in this book in real life. There is a fat character in this book who has, like, the most sincere and, like, beautiful description of being a fat character that I have ever read. That's kind of what I have to say about Manhunt. I don't really want to give too much away because I think that this book goes on a lot of journeys. It's very political, apocalypse horror. I say political not because of transness, but because of how the TERF group kind of exists in, like, dealing with politics between towns in the apocalypse. Manhunt. Back to the murder mystery realm, I read the Decagon House Murders. This is another book I got recommended on the Umineko Reddit. It's definitely far less gruesome than Tokyo Zodiac in terms of the Japanese horror books that I've read this year. Japanese mystery horror. I'm really glad that I read And Then There Were None before this one because I feel like there's very similar theming going on in it between the way that the killer kind of works and, like, their calling card and just the environment that the characters are on. These characters are also on an abandoned island. The characters in this book are actually really big fans of murder mysteries. They're all in a murder mystery club at their college, and all of them go by aliases and go by different names of mystery authors that they really, really like. So there's kind of two sides of this story. There's the characters going to the island and getting picked off one by one. And then we have characters back on the mainland, our detectives, who are trying to solve the crime before it even happens because they don't technically know it's happening, but they have a feeling that something's going on. I actually realized that after reading this book, this author is responsible for one of my favorite animes of all time. Another. Thank you for my darling girl, Mizaki Mei. I'm very excited to read that light novel next year. Anyway, this one definitely has the most clever ending out of all of the murder mysteries that I've read this year, so I will give this that wholeheartedly. I definitely recommend Decagon House Murders. I think that there's a lot of fun, kind of classic murder mystery about this, while it also being like kind of modern. It's not really modern. I'm pretty sure this book's from the 80s. Yeah, this book is from 1987, so it's not modern, but it's more modern than Christie, so. Pale Fire, I think, is one of the best books I have ever read. It's probably my favorite from this year. This was also recommended to me on the Umineko subreddit, which is really interesting, actually, considering it's not a murder mystery. It's not a horror. It's a metafiction book that dissects a poem written by a fictional character. So Pale Fire follows a close friend of a poet who recently passed away. So Charles gets permission to annotate John Shade's last poem, which is a 999-line poem called Pale Fire. The book starts with a foreword written by Charles, kind of giving you a brief background to why he is annotating this text and about his friend's recent passing. Then we read the full poem from John Shade. And the poem really kind of depicts like John's life in his last few years, and he's thinking about death and him and his wife. And one of the cantos really is about like grief and trauma and all these kinds of things. As this book goes on with its annotations, it is a line-by-line annotation for the rest of this book. We realize that Charles might be misinterpreting what the poem is about. What we get out of the rest of the book is a crazy political murder drama. I really can't talk about this too much without giving away the things I really love about it. This book is phenomenal. If you like the metafiction elements of Umineko or of other visual novels, you will like Pale Fire. It took me a little bit to get into because I didn't follow what was happening at first until I really started paying attention to the specific things that Charles is interpreting in this poem. And the book kind of carries you from there. And it's very dense, but it's amazing. Pale Fire. We have made it. I keep saying I have not found a detective that I have really liked throughout any of these books. They've been fun mysteries, they've had fun culprits, fun reveals, fun scenarios, but the first detective I've had any attachment to is the protagonist of the Honjin Murders. Kosuke Kendaichi is a detective that is kind of like, I don't want to say Sherlock Holmes-esque, but he's just a very odd dude. He's very unkempt. He wears like very like old kind of traditional clothing. Like he just looks very out of place wherever he goes. And his mannerisms are just like very uncool and very awkward. He's just a very fun character to watch interact with the casts in his stories. I've read 2 of them this year. Again, the first being the Honjin Murders. This is the shortest book that I read this year. It is less than 190 pages. I actually was not recommended this one either. I saw this one while looking for other books and saw that it was the same publisher, can't really see that, Pushkin Vertigo, that published and translated both Tokyo Zodiac and Decagon House Murders. So this is about a murder that takes place the night of a couple's wedding, where the couple are both brutally murdered together in a locked room scenario. And the uncle of the bride remembers that he at one point had a relationship with this young detective and brings him onto this case. And the actual mystery of this one was incredibly fun to follow along with and solve. Again, a mystery novel, I really can't give too much away without starting to get into things, but if you want a really fun detective and also just a really fun method of murder, I highly recommend the Honjin Murders. I would say just about every other book I have read up till now on this list, I read in maybe a few days. This is the first book that took me about a month and a half to get through. The Terror. This is the book that inspired the AMC series. I have not seen the AMC series. I have a Tumblr, so I see James Fitzjames everywhere, but I have not actually checked it out yet. I adore The Terror. This is like one of the best straight up horror novels I have ever read. So The Terror is a historical fiction novel. It follows the Franklin expedition, where hundreds of crew members went on this 2-ship expedition to find the Northwest Passage through the Arctic, and they all get lost and are never seen again. I am not a historian. I cannot give you the best facts on this. There's plenty of other videos explaining what actually happened on the Franklin expedition. But regardless of how much you know about it or not, this is a fantastic read and is 100% not a historically accurate account, because there is a sci-fi, like fantasy element to this. The men are being hunted down one by one by a giant beast of some sort who is frozen in on this iceberg with them. It is a page turner. Like, despite how long this took me to read, every single page is full of suspense. You want to keep going. I really, really enjoyed The Terror. And a fun fact, literally about a week after I finished The Terror is when they found the real Captain James Fitzjames' actual jaw with proof that he was eaten. So, on that note, congratulations, Tumblrinas, your Paul McCartney was found. Yay! I recommend The Terror. The book is fantastic, especially if you want just like a horror that really pulls you in and makes you feel like you're really experiencing everything along with them. After getting through the literal beast that was The Terror, I ended up kind of going a lot slower with reading for the rest of the year. But I knew I needed kind of like a pick-me-up just to get you back into the swing of things, so I dove into the second of Kosuke Kondaichi's mysteries. So this is Death on Gokumon Island. I will say I was not as compelled with this one as I was with Honjin Murders, but I still, again, really enjoyed reading about Kosuke and how he interacts with the other characters in the mystery. This one's about Kosuke returning after World War II and serving as a soldier, and going to tell his fallen comrade's family that his friend passed away. He does not fully realize that with the death of this child in the family rivalry kind of starts to erupt, and he is caught in the middle of it. Again, this is not the strongest mystery I read this year, but it was still very enjoyable. I personally did not figure out all of the mystery elements really until the end. I haven't read the rest of his series, so I don't know what the balance is between like which ones are the best or which ones are the most interesting. I definitely recommend Honjin Murders first, and I enjoy it more than this one, but this was a good read. I liked it. You remember the praise I gave Manhunt, because it really pains me to give this review. I was so excited for Cuckoo to come out with how much I loved Manhunt. And after finishing it, just the whole way through the book, I was like, man, and it's gonna get good soon, right? And it's gonna get good, right? I really don't want to give a hateful review, because there are things I like about Cuckoo. I found a lot of the characters pretty charming, but I think that, especially compared to Manhunt, I think that the characters weren't developed enough. The actual scenario wasn't that interesting, and the parts that I thought were interesting were the things that got really sped through, and I'm like trying to catch up. But let me actually give you a general plot synopsis about what Cuckoo is. Cuckoo is a fantasy horror that's kind of set in reality but with fantastical elements by, again, the same author as Manhunt. And it follows a group of children and teens who are all queer in some way and who are captured and taken into a conversion camp. This conversion camp isn't fully what it seems. Some of the other kids at camp just come back to their families a little different. there were elements of this that I found really, really interesting that just weren't dived into enough, and elements that I thought were just really long and ongoing kept going on and on and on. And something that I kind of noticed in this, which is like, I personally am someone who's really not a fan of like characters throwing up. Like, if it's plot serving, yeah, do it. Make it make sense. A character throws up at least like once every other page in this book. Like, that is every character's reaction to everything is just that they throw up all the time. And I'm not sure why. I don't like it. I didn't like reading it. I just found it a very gross book compared to Manhunt. Had some vulgarity and grossness to it, but it all really felt like it served the story and added to the horror of everything. And that world was so extreme that I felt like you could really get away with a lot. Cuckoo is very set in reality, and there's really only one fantastical element going on. And that element just really was not there enough for me, and the characters were just not developed enough for me to care. You might like this. I'm not gonna say don't read it. You might like it. With everything I said, this is my least favorite that I read this year, which I do like the author. I love Manhunt, just Cuckoo was not for me. The next book I read I actually don't have on the stack here because it's the only audiobook I got through this year. This is pretty much unlike everything else on the list. I was working on a project over the summer and just really wanted something to listen to, and I saw that Spotify had Down with the System by Serge Tankian, and I am a huge System of a Down fan, so I listened to the whole thing in like a week and finished my project. It was a really, really good listen, especially in just like kind of everything about right now. It was a really nice perspective on life and the history of the Armenian genocide and the history of the band and the history of his activism. I also now really highly recommend people listen to audiobooks that are like autobios read by the author. I think that was a really nice personal touch. I have a few more on my read list now. I don't really have much to say else about it besides that it was just really nice learning about one of my favorite singers and his home life and everything that came before the band and what he does with his art. So if you're a System fan, it's a good listen. Now, if you have looked at any other book list that gives like horror suggestions in the past at all ever, especially on the internet in the past like 2 years, you will have seen this book recommended 1,000 times. And that is because House of Leaves is fucking phenomenal. This really kind of tied with Pale Fire as my favorite book of the year. So now I really, really know that I like metafiction and annotation and books within books, which shouldn't have been a surprise to me, but here we are. House of Leaves is a pretty dense thing to kind of give a good summation of. I'm sure there's 1,000 other YouTubers who have really gotten into the guts of it, but the basic premise of House of Leaves follows our main character, Johnny, as he discovers this chest in a recently deceased old man's apartment, where the chest is full of annotations and analysis of a documentary called The Navidson Record. And what Johnny kind of realizes really early on is that the Navidson Record does not exist. The Navidson family does not exist. None of the characters in the documentary exist. The entire thing seems to be made up by this elderly man. I think his name's Zampano. I read it, so I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. So the book consists of a few different layers of fiction. The most outside layer is Johnny's story and his experience with, he has now decided to compile all of this writing on the Navidson Record and combine it into one book. With his own annotations and his own anecdotes about his life in between the pages. We learn a lot about Johnny's life throughout the book and kind of his mental condition and what this project is doing to him. There's that cycle. Then we kind of through the annotation and the analysis of the Navidson record, we learn about the content of this documentary. How it follows Will Navidson, who is a photojournalist, photographer, and him and his wife move out to the suburbs, and he finds that his house is different on the inside than it is on the outside, which sends him down a like spiraling obsession with why is his house like this. Outside of just kind of going through the content of what is in the documentary, Zampano goes through in his analysis of it, quoting all of these sources as if every person in the world has watched this insane documentary and has commented on it. And as Johnny kind of realizes throughout the book, really nothing Zampano is saying has happened or has any factual way to back up. It has a lot of layers to it. It has a lot of meat to it. You'd know it as the book that has all the funny text in it, where words are blue and they're all kind of like random and all over the page and whatnot. I actually got into this thinking that I'd find it really hard to read. It was an incredibly easy read. If I can assure anyone about anything, the actual prose in House of Leaves is really easy to digest. And if you're a fan of horror, it is such a good horror. It is so suspenseful. You really get into themes of like grief and trauma and cycles, and like that's the kind of stuff that really hits for me. So I absolutely adored House of Leaves. This is part of my own personal thing that I'm not sure how many other people find fascinating. I went to film school and I took so many documentary classes and took this one that was like a documentary analysis course. And I loved that course so much. I would write analysis for fun. So the fact that the major content of this book is analysis of a documentary, beautiful. Perfect. Made for me. This literally is if like someone made a book that was meant to go directly into my brain, it would be House of Leaves. This is, again, one of the books that got recommended from the Umineko subreddit. Visual novel fans, like, this kind of feels like required reading for visual novel fans, if I had to put it in any way. It is just sincerely, like, one of the top best things I've ever read. So, House of Leaves. So, I took a little break after House of Leaves because it was so... it really resonated with me, and I kind of went back and forth on these two books a little bit just because they weren't exactly what I was looking for, but I ended up really liking both of them. So this is, we're getting to the end. We got Magpie Murders. This wasn't on my Umineko list, but I would definitely put it there. It is a book within a book. Magpie Murders is about a author who is like an Agatha Christie type, like more modern Agatha Christie, I suppose. He's a famous mystery author and has created Atticus Pund, a character who is kind of like a Sherlock Holmes type detective, like a Poirot type detective. This is his last book in the series, and his editor sits down to read it. So we start with her point of view and then immediately dive into what there is of Magpie Murders. Right when you get to the very hook of what makes this book within a book so interesting and so perfect for like golden age mystery, we're thrust back into the editor's life. And she has to kind of puzzle out what this book means in the context of what's going on in her life. I don't want to give it any more than that, just that I'll give you that you switch between the golden age mystery story and the editor's life. I will say, in terms of just like fairness to the other books I've given critiques of, I definitely preferred the book within the book rather than the book outside the book. I just got way more out of the prose of like the golden age mystery story, but also that's kind of what this book is celebrating, is that type of writing while also poking fun at it. So I think if you're a fan of like classic Christie, that kind of era of mystery, you would like Magpie Murders. Okay, we're on the last book that I read in 2024. And this was not one that I got on that Reddit list, But I actually think this one would be a really fun comparison to Umineko, particularly like the relationship with Beatrice and Battler. I'm sure that, kind of like House of Leaves, you have seen this recommended all over the internet. This is How You Lose the Time War. It is just under 200 pages. It's about two agents on opposite sides of a war in time. They are people outside of just like regular humans that belong to two factions who change events over the course of like all of history. And that is their battle, is in these crucial moments in history to make sure that certain things happen certain ways. These two agents, Red and Blue, go back and forth, sabotaging each other's plans and then leaving one another a little note. I don't want to give more than that because I think that's a really good summation of what this book is. This is some of the best prose I have read. Like, the actual language and writing in this book is so beautiful. I haven't really seen writing that's just like this lyrical and poetic and like so many metaphors, and it is so much less about the world that they occupy than it is about these two characters, what they do and how they interact with each other. And I am someone, romantic or not otherwise, I am a sucker for like a dual protagonist narrative where two characters' lives are very enmeshed. So, like pretty much every other book on this list, I highly recommend this one. It was one of my favorites this year, and very different from most of the other ones I read. I haven't really gotten into enough sci-fi that I've really genuinely liked. This is probably the best like dystopian sci-fi I've ever read. It's good. Sometimes when you write good characters, your book's good. It's crazy. All right, so that's it for kind of my book tour of 2024. Again, I really have not read this much ever, and I am genuinely so happy and proud of myself that I got through all of this, and it really has given me a huge passion for reading again. I feel like, especially with like the way that I've seen bookstores in the past few years, like the direction that like really popular fiction has gotten into, I am really not a huge fan of like fantasy, or like specifically like the type of fantasy I see at bookstores. That's like all the big book talk ones. And I'm not a huge fan of like, I've outgrown YA. I'm looking for more mature, interesting prose. I'm looking for family drama. I'm looking for really good mystery. I'm looking for horror and gore and gruesomeness. I've bought a bunch of other books this year that I haven't gotten around to reading yet, so there'll eventually maybe be another one of these. But if you watched the whole thing, thank you so much. If you'd like to hear more about my thoughts on any of these, or if you want to hear thoughts on like how I feel that these relate to Umineko specifically, since that is kind of where I got the inspiration to really dig into reading this year, that was what this video was originally going to be, was comparing and contrasting the books I read from that Reddit list to Umineko and how they balance out. But then I ended up reading a ton of stuff that wasn't from that list, so I just wanted to go through every book I read this year and kind of my thoughts on them, what they're about, give you my recommendations. My favorite genres ever are mystery and horror, so if you are a big genre head for either of those, I recommend most, if not all, of these books. And obviously, I highly recommend Higurashi and Umineko, as well as other of my favorite visual novels. If you'd like to hear more about media analysis and media talk from me, please let me know. I would love to make more videos like this and kind of dust off my camera. Well, thank you so much, and happy 2025!